listeners, welcome to the Lost in Pretend podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Sealey, and in today's episode, I will be sharing with you a dream I call False Awakening. I encourage you to sit on your bed, close your eyes, and allow this episode to become a soundtrack for your own imagination. Or grab a sketchbook and visualize these dreams in your own style. So let's get started. So this dream is a little bit shorter because quite literally the entire thing was a false awakening loop. So the title is also pretty generic and descriptive. But I will say that this is one of my scariest dreams to date because I've never experienced something like this before. So even though I was not fighting for my life, I was not getting injured, it wasn't a horror or a thriller, it was still scary because I never actually had experience before this point with being aware that I am dreaming while I'm in a dream. In my last episode, I talked about my dreaming patterns and the fact that I can lucid dream and I can control what is happening to an extent. But another aspect of lucid dreaming is knowing that you are dreaming in that dream. And oftentimes that is how people are able to control what happens. But this was actually my first time being aware that I'm dreaming and existing with that knowledge for a certain period of time. If I've ever gotten close to this beforehand, my body would just wake me up before I could actually do anything about it. And of course, I love dreaming. I love talking about it, hence this entire podcast, this entire thesis project. And I thought the idea of lucid dreaming was pretty appealing, actually, because I love thinking about and existing in these false realities where I can do whatever I want and extend beyond the limits of my reality. But I didn't realize just how scary that could be when you don't actually intend to be in that space. And so in this dream, it was really scary because at one point I almost felt like I couldn't actually wake up and I would be stuck in this loop forever. So some background info on what was happening around this time. I think it was a Saturday or a Sunday, and the day before, one of my roommates and I decided to go to brunch at around 11 a.m. or so. We had decided the day prior that the next day we would go to brunch. And so I went to bed thinking that I need to wake up at a certain time so that I can get ready and go to brunch with her and that I would be on time. I didn't want to be late. I didn't want to delay everything. And I think that's part of the reason why I had this false awakening loop in the first place. It was a moment of me really wanting to sleep in, but not being able to. Willingly, of course. And so I remember going to bed, and sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I like to listen to music to kind of calm my mind. And I share a room with one of my other roommates. So technically, I'm in a double. And so she sleeps in one position, I sleep in another on our separate beds, of course. And I just kind of fell asleep thinking about the space that I was in, just kind of calming my mind, also thinking about the music that I was listening to. And after a period of time, when I realized that I was actually falling asleep, I decided to take out my AirPods and turn off my music and actually, try and, speed up the process of actually moving on with the night. I felt like the time to listen to music was over. And so I also remember that I was wearing a specific pajama set. And all of these details are important because that is exactly how I pictured myself in this dream as well. In the dream, I pictured myself sleeping in that exact position with my roommate in her position on her bed. And about 10 times, I woke up only to realize that I wasn't actually awake. And well, how did I realize that I wasn't actually awake? Well, music played a really, really big role in that. And so I would listen to music in my AirPods, of course. When it was time to fall asleep, I would take out the AirPods, turn off the music, put them away, and go back to sleep. But then a few moments later, magically the AirPods would be back in my ears again, and the music would have started again. And that's when I kind of realized in every single loop that I wasn't actually waking up slash falling asleep in real life, and that this was a dream and that things were restarting. However, almost as soon as I came to that realization, it would start all over again. And so over time, I started to get a little bit more frustrated. So in my last dream, in my last episode, part of the plot line was a loop. And one thing that I talked about was restarting that loop over and over again without any knowledge of previously going through it. And that's kind of what was happening in this dream as well, where every time I woke up with music in my ears over and over again, I wouldn't really be aware of the fact that this was happening again and again. Like, I couldn't actually pinpoint what was wrong, but somehow I subconsciously knew that I should be frustrated until about the fifth or sixth time going through that time loop. That's when I realized that I keep on waking up in a dream state. When is it going to be reality? When will I be able to get out of this bed, say good morning to my roommates, and actually exist in real life? And that was pretty scary. That was pretty annoying. Thankfully, I did not have to exist with that worry for too long because I did wake up after the 10th time of going through this loop. But it was definitely an interesting experience to say the least. Interestingly enough, as well, every time I woke up, my roommate would be doing something different. I will admit, most of the time she was sleeping, but there were a couple times where she had a tuna fish sandwich, which looked incredibly good. I would say it was a tuna melt specifically. Other times she had this sort of remote that I cannot really explain. It was navy blue. It had yellow and white and pink buttons in the shapes of squares, crescent moons, and stars. And it almost felt as if she was trying to tell me that I kept on waking up in a dream state. She would point the remote at me, directly at me, telling me to look, press these buttons, like take this from me. And I never actually got to hold it in this dream, but it was as if she was trying to tell me that something is wrong and that you are not actually waking up. And so that was pretty that was a pretty interesting thing to go through as well, I would say. It definitely felt strange because it took me a couple of loops to actually figure out what was going on. And now that I think about it, actually, another way that you could visualize what this remote looked like is it was an extra large version of the remote that comes in some cars for those like mini screens that would display like DVD movies and things like that. So my family has a Honda, and so our remote has pretty thick buttons. And I would say that this quote unquote dreamscape remote that my roommate had was just a larger version of that. Well, anyway, the last thing that I wanted to mention is how this dream reminds me of Inception. It seems to be a common theme now that my dreams are reminding me of this movie in one way or another, since I also discussed it in my last episode. But this time, I am reminded of how Cobb and his team had to go through the various layers were the multiple deeper layers of Fisher's mind in order to implant an idea to make it seem as if it was his own original thought. And what reminds me of this in this false awakening loop dream is that as I kept on waking up in the dream, I did kind of feel like I was getting closer and closer to waking up in real life. I just didn't know exactly when that would happen or how many false awakening loops that would take. And that concludes my dream false awakening. I started that day off feeling pretty intrigued and tired, honestly, since that was technically my 11th time waking up for that morning. But of course, just as my last dream, I got over it pretty quickly. So I thank you for listening, and I do wonder what this dream looked like for you, and if there are any similarities between your subconscious and mine.